Moving on, I do have another story. It's a little bit longer. This one is about Chinese fishing fleets that were caught near the Galápagos Islands. The headline was Great Wall of Lights, China's sea power on Darwin's doorstep. Of course, I clicked into that. It turns out to be a fascinating story. Some of you may have already heard of this. It was delivered by the Associated Press, but the AP and Univision, they accompanied a patrol boat for 18 days to observe up close for the first time the Chinese distant water fishing fleet that are on the high seas off of South America. You can Google this and read it for yourself. It's pretty gripping. But a patrol was prompted. Actually, last year, there was international outcry over this because apparently hundreds of Chinese vessels were discovered fishing for squid near those islands. I missed this news. I had no idea this happened. But imagine, you can clearly imagine the uproar when hundreds to maybe thousands of ships were seen around those famed islands because people were fearing the impact on the biodiversity. But apparently, China's kind of forced into this deployment so far out because it's actually decades of overfishing that have pushed its fleets further away from their mainland. And so, you have that going, and then you have the fact that this is actually an industry in China that they take pride in it the way that the US used to take pride in their space program. So, it's one of those things where like the wider it gets, maybe it's working in the favor in terms of messaging that is being delivered to their people.
Interesting.
Right. And look, it's hard to criticize a specific country like China because, Europe and the United States have also been raiding the seas for decades as well. But the sheer size of the fleet is what's causing the latest stir. And there's fear illegal fishing is going to soar because there are thousands of boats on the seas right now. It's a dark story with dark sides. Of the 30 vessels the AP observed up close, 24 had a history of labor abuse accusations, past convictions for illegal fishing, or they showed signs of violating law. 16 ships either sailed with their mandatory safety transponders turned off, they broadcast multiple electronic IDs, or they transmitted information that didn't match the listed name or location. 6 ships were owned by companies accused of forced labor, including one vessel whose crew said that they had been stuck at sea for years. So this all reminded me of our conversation with Benjamin Lohr last year about his book, The Secret Life of Groceries, and specifically about how modern slavery is existing in our supply chains. And in that book, we learned about how the Thai fishermen were out at sea, so people here in the States could eat shrimp cocktail. It's like stories like that are tied to this current news. And then I started thinking about it from the animal's perspective. We've talked about animal consciousness and intelligence before on the podcast, and now imagine the sound of the mechanical jiggers that are pulling the catch from the oceans. Think about the sounds that could be heard like hundreds of feet away. Think about the smell of the water. And as you're approaching it, imagine the squids blowing their ink sacs one final time, trying to avoid their final fate. It's crazy. And this was written in the article, and I was like reading it. I'm like completely gripped by this story. It turns out that fishing is taking place mostly at night. Each ship is just turning on hundreds of lights as powerful as stadium lights to attract these squid. And the concentration is so intense, you can see space satellite images of them online. It looks like a little city in the middle of the ocean.
Wow.
It's crazy. You should Google it and read more about it. The writers did a really, really good job. The point of sharing it right now is, I think, first to remind folks to be grateful for what we have and be grateful that you're not stuck at sea. Be grateful that you're not in a forced labor situation. But it's also to add to the sustainability conversation. I mean, this strikes me and probably you as some unsustainable behavior in a really unregulated market. I imagine it's incredibly difficult to do anything because how can you really distinguish between what's a legal fish and an illegal fish when you're eating it. And so how are
Yeah.
you going to like force transparency? I feel like the fishing industry just has this really dark side to it. It's had it for decades. And especially when you think about the world is demanding a product, and there's just so much forced labor that's going on behind the scenes. So again, just a reminder that like right now in mm, at least the United States, there's some freedom to the choice you have in terms of the industry you're in or what you want to be a part of. And I think that is the message that really resonated with me.